Section 7 of Lives of the Queens of England, Volume 5, by Agnes and Elisabeth Strickland. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Catharine Parr, Chapter 2, Part 4. After Queen Catharine had been the wife of her beloved Seymour some months, there was a prospect of her becoming a mother. Her raptures at the anticipation of a blessing which had been denied to all of her other marriages carried her beyond the bounds of discretion, and her husband was no less transported than herself. The feelings of paternity with them amounted to passion. During a brief separation, while Seymour was at court, vainly soliciting of his brother the restoration of Queen Catharine's property, among which not only the late king's gifts, but those of her mother, were unjustly detained, he writes in a very confidential and loving strain to his teeming consort: "After my humble commendations and thanks for your letter, as I was perplexed heretofore with unkindness, apprehending I should not have justice in all my causes, from those that I thought would have been partial to me, even so the receiving of your letter revived my spirits, partly for that I do perceive you be armed with patience, howsoever the matter may fall, but chiefest," here he proceeds to exult in fierce hopes that his expected son, should God give him life to live as long as his father, will revenge his wrongs. "Now," continues he, "to put you in some hope again. This day, a little before the receiving your letter, I have spoken to my lord Somerset, whom I have so well handled that he is somewhat qualified, and although I am in no hopes thereof, yet I am in no despair. I have also broken to him for your mother's gift. He makes answer, that at the finishing of the matter you shall either have your own again, or else some recompense as ye shall be content withal. I spake to him of your going down into the country on Wednesday, who was sorry thereof, trusting that I would be here all tomorrow, to hear what the Frenchman will do. But on Monday, at dinner, I trust to be with you. As for the Frenchmen, I have no mistrust that they shall be any let or hindrance of my going with you this journey, or any of my continuing there with your highness. Thus, till that time, I bid your highness most heartily well to fare, and thank you for your news, which were right heartily welcome to me." He then expresses his wishes that both the queen and his expected progeny, whom he insists is to be a boy, may be kept in health, with good diet and walking, and concludes in these words: "And so I bid my most dear and well-beloved wife most heartily well to fare. From Westminster, this Saturday, the 9th of June. Your highness's most faithful loving husband, T. Seymour." The queen was then at Hanworth, one of the royal manors belonging to her dower, from whence Seymour escorted her to his principal baronial residence, Sudley Castle. The jealousy with which the Duke of Somerset regarded his brother the admiral operated to prevent, as far as he could, the slightest intercourse between him and their royal nephew, the young king. The admiral, however, who was bent on superseding Somerset in the office of protector, contrived to keep up a secret correspondence with Edward and to supply him with money, of which he was kept almost destitute. One of the agents of this correspondence was John Fowler, a gentleman of Edward's privy chamber. The following letter shows how vigilantly the young king was beset, and the jealous care taken by Somerset and his satellites to prevent his writing to that beloved stepmother, to whom his heart yearned with not less than filial tenderness. John Fowler to my Lord Admiral. I most humbly thank your lordship for your letter, dated the 15th of this present, which letter I showed to the king's majesty, and whereas, in my last letter to your lordship, I wrote unto you, if his grace could get any spare time, his grace would write a letter to the queen's grace and to you. His highness desires your lordship to pardon him, for his grace is not half a quarter of an hour alone, but in such leisure as his grace had, his majesty hath written, here enclosed, his commendations to the queen's grace, and to your lordship, that he is so much bound to you that he must needs remember you always, and as his grace may have time, you shall well perceive by such small lines of recommendations with his own hand. Enclosed within Fowler's letters are the royal notes alluded to, written by Edward's own hand on torn and shabby scraps of paper, betraying both the scarcity of that article in the royal escritory, and the stealthy manner in which they were penned. The first is a mysterious request for money addressed to his uncle. My lord, send me, per Latimer, as much as ye think good, and deliver it to Fowler. Edward. The second of these small lines is, My lord, I thank you, and I pray you to have commended me to the queen. There is in the context of Fowler's letter an allusion to Queen Catharine's situation, with a friendly wish for the birth of the son, of whom both parents were so fondly desirous. He says, My lady of Somerset is brought to bed of a goodly boy, and I trust in Almighty God the queen's grace shall have another. Fowler's letter is dated July 19th from Hampton, where the young king then was. Seymour's great object was to get a letter written by King Edward, complaining of the arbitrary conduct of the Protector, and the restraint in which he was kept by him. Edward had actually consented to write the letter, which the admiral was to lay before the Parliament, but before this could be done, the plot was betrayed to the Protector. The admiral was called before the council to answer for his proceedings. He defied them, but when he was threatened with imprisonment in the Tower, he made submissions to his brother. A hollow reconciliation took place for the present, and £800 per annum was added to his appointments by the Protector, in the hope of conciliating him. As long as Queen Catharine lived, the admiral was too powerful for his foes. Perhaps he did not sufficiently appreciate her value, even in a political and worldly view, till it was too late. The residence of the Princess Elisabeth under their roof was fatal to the wedded happiness of Seymour and Catharine. The queen, forgetful that a blooming girl in her 15th year was no longer a child, had imprudently encouraged the admiral to romp with her royal stepdaughter in her presence. Mrs. Ashley, the Princess Elizabeth's governess, in her deposition before the Privy Council, gives a strange picture of the coarse manners of the times, in which such proceedings could be tolerated in a palace, and with royal ladies. At Chelsea, after my lord Thomas Seymour was married to the queen, he would come many mornings into the said Lady Elizabeth's chamber before she was ready, and sometimes before she did rise, and if she were up, he would bid her good morrow, and ax how she did, and strike her on the back familiarly, and so go forth to his chamber, and sometimes go through to her maidens and play with them. And if the princess were in bed, he would put open the curtains and bid her good morrow, and she would go further in the bed. And one morning he tried to kiss the princess in her bed, and this deponent was there, and bade him go away for shame. At Hanworth for 2 mornings, the queen, Catharine Parr, was with him, and they both tickled my lady Elisabeth in her bed. Another time at Hanworth, he romped with her in the garden and cut her gown, being black cloth, into 100 pieces, and when Mrs. Ashley came up and chid Lady Elisabeth, she answered, she could not strive withal, for the queen held her while the Lord Admiral cut the dress. Another time, Lady Elisabeth heard the master key unlock, and knowing his Lord Admiral would come in, ran out of her bed to her maidens, and then went behind the curtain of her bed, and my lord tarried a long time in hopes she would come out. Mrs. Ashley could not tell how long. She, Mrs. Ashley, was told these things were complained of, and that the Lady Elisabeth was evil spoken of. Then the Lord Admiral swore, God's precious soul! I will tell my Lord Protector how I am slandered, and I will not leave off, for I mean no evil. At Seymour Place, when the queen slept there, he did use a while to come up every morning in his nightgown and slippers. When he found my lady Elisabeth up and at her book, then he would look in at the gallery door and bid her good morrow, and so go on his way. And the deponent told my lord it was an unseemly sight to see a man so little dressed in a maiden's chamber, with which he was angry, but he left it. At Hanworth, the queen told Mrs. Ashley, that my lord admiral looked in at the gallery window, and saw my lady Elisabeth with her arms about a man's neck. Upon which Mrs. Ashley questioned her charge regarding it, and the lady Elisabeth denied it, weeping, and bade them ask all her women, if there were any man who came to her excepting Grindal? My lady Elisabeth's schoolmaster. Howbeit, Mrs. Ashley thought, the queen being jealous, did feign this story, to the intent that Mrs. Ashley might take more heed in the proceedings of Lady Elizabeth and the Lord Admiral. The governess added, that her husband, Mr. Ashley, who, it seems, was a relative of Anne Boleyn, did often give warning, that he feared the princess did bear some affection to the Lord Admiral, as she would sometimes blush when she heard him spoken of. Elizabeth herself told Parry, the cofferer of her household, that she feared the admiral loved her but too well, and the queen was jealous of them both, and that, suspecting the frequent access of the admiral to her, she came suddenly upon them when they were alone, he having her in his arms. Queen Catharine was greatly offended with them both, and very sharply reproved the princess's governess for her neglect of her duty to her royal pupil, in permitting her to fall into such reprehensible freedom of behaviour. Conjugal jealousy apart, Catharine Parr had great cause for anger and alarm, for the princess was under her especial care, and if aught but good befell her at the tender age of 15, great blame would, of course, attach to herself, especially if the admiral, for whom she had already outraged popular opinion by marrying with indecorous precipitation, were the author of her young stepdaughter's ruin. It is just possible that the actual guilt incurred by the unhappy queen, Catherine Howard, in her girlhood, did not amount to a greater degree of impropriety than the unseemly romping which took place almost every day at Chelsea, between the youthful princess Elizabeth and the bold bad husband of Catharine Parr. It does not appear that any violent or injurious expressions were used by Catharine Parr, but she saw the expediency of separating her household from that of the princess, and acted upon it without delay. There is no reason to believe that she cherished vindictive feelings against Elizabeth, for she continued to correspond with her in a friendly and affectionate manner, as the princess herself testifies in a playful and somewhat familiar letter which is here subjoined. Lady Elizabeth to the Queen. Although your highness's letters be most joyful to me, in absence, yet considering what pain it is for you to write, your grace being so sickly, your commendations were enough in my lord's letter. I must rejoice at your health, with the well liking of the country, with my humble thanks that your grace wished me with you till I was weary of that country. Your highness were like to be cumbered if I should not depart till I was weary of being with you. Although it were the worst soil in the world, your presence would make it pleasant. I cannot reprove my lord for not doing your commendations in his letter, for he did it, and although he had not, yet I will not complain on him, for he shall be diligent to give me knowledge from time to time how his busy child doth, and if I were at his birth, no doubt I would see him beaten, for the trouble he hath put you to. Master Denny and my lady, with humble thanks, prayeth most entirely for your grace, praying the Almighty God to send you a most lucky deliverance, and my mistress wisheth no less, giving your highness most humble thanks for her commendations. Written with very little leisure, this last day of July, your humble daughter, Elizabeth. This letter, dated within 6 weeks of the queen's death, affords convincing evidence she was on amicable terms with her royal stepdaughter. She had not only written kindly to Elizabeth, expressing a wish that she were with her at Sudley, but she had even encouraged the admiral to write, when not well enough herself to continue the correspondence, a proof that Catharine Parr, though she had considered it proper to put a stop to the dangerous familiarity with which her husband had presumed to demean himself towards her royal charge, did not regard it as anything beyond a passing folly. But even if her heart had been torn with a temporary pang of jealousy, she was too amiable to blight the opening flower of Elizabeth's life, by revealing a feeling so injurious to the honour of the youthful princess. It was not, however, Elizabeth, but the young and early wise Lady Jane Grey, who became the companion of Catharine Parr at Sudley Castle, when she withdrew thither to await the birth of her child. Lady Jane continued with Queen Catharine till the melancholy sequel of her fond hopes of maternity. Sudley Castle was royal property, that had been granted to the admiral by the regency on the death of King Henry. It was suspected that lands thus illegally obtained were held on a doubtful tenure. One day, when Queen Catharine was walking in Sudley Park with her husband and Sir Robert Tyrwhitt, she said, "Master Tyrwhitt, will you see the king, when he cometh to full age, will call in his lands again, as fast as they be now given away from him." "Marry," said Master Tyrwhitt, "then will Sudley Castle be gone from your lord admiral." "Marry," rejoined the queen, "I do assure you he intends to offer to restore them, and give them back freely when the time comes." Queen Catharine had a princely retinue in attendance upon her, in her retirement at Sudley Castle, of ladies in waiting, maids of honour, and gentlewomen in ordinary, besides the appointments for her expected nursery and lying in chamber, and more than 120 gentlemen of her household, and yeomen of the guard. She had several of the most learned men, among the lights of the Reformation, for her chaplains, and she caused divine worship to be performed twice a day, or oftener, in her house, notwithstanding the distaste of the admiral, who not only refused to attend these devotional exercises himself, but proved a great let and hindrance to all the pious regulations his royal consort strove to establish. This opposition came with an ill grace from Seymour, who, for political purposes, professed to be a reformer, and had shared largely in the plunder of the old church, but in his heart he had no more liking for Protestant prayers and sermons than Queen Catharine's deceased lord, King Henry. A few days before her confinement, Catharine received the following friendly letter from the Princess Mary. "Madam, although I have troubled your highness lately with sundry letters, yet that notwithstanding seeing my lord Marquess, who hath taken the pains to come to me at this present, intendeth to see your grace shortly, I could not be satisfied without writing to the same, and especially because I purpose to-morrow, with the help of God, to begin my journey towards Norfolk, where I shall be farther from your grace, which journey I have intended since Whitsuntide, but lack of health hath stayed me all the while, which although it be, as yet, unstable, nevertheless I am enforced to remove for a time, hoping, with God's grace, to return again about Michaelmas, at which time, or shortly after, I trust to hear good success of your grace's condition, and in the meantime shall desire much to hear of your health, which I pray Almighty God to continue and increase to his pleasure, as much as your own heart can desire. And thus, with my most humble commendations to your highness, I take my leave of the same, desiring your grace to take the pain to make my commendations to my lord admiral." From Beaulieu, the 9th of August. Your highness's most humble and assured loving daughter, Mary. The lord Marquess, mentioned by Mary, was Queen Catharine's only brother, William Parr, Marquess of Northampton. His guilty and unhappy wife, the heiress of Essex, was then at Sudley Castle, under some restraint, and in the keeping of her royal sister-in-law. This unpleasant charge must have greatly disquieted the last troubled months of Catharine Parr's life. On the 30th of August, 1548, Catharine Parr gave birth, at Sudley Castle, to the infant whose appearance had been so fondly anticipated both by Seymour and herself. It was a girl, and though both parents had confidently expected a boy, no disappointment was expressed. On the contrary, Seymour, in a transport of paternal pride, wrote so eloquent a description of the beauty of the new-born child to his brother, the Duke of Somerset, that the latter added the following kind postscript to a stern letter of expostulation and reproof, which he had just finished writing to him when he received his joyous communication. After our hearty commendations, we are right glad to understand by your letters that the queen, your bedfellow, hath a happy hour, and escaping all danger, hath made you the father of so pretty a daughter. And although, if it had pleased God, it would have been both to us, and we suppose, also to you, a more joy and comfort if it had, this the firstborn, been a son, yet the escape of the danger, and the prophecy and good hansel of this, to a great sort of happy sons, which, as you write, we trust no less than to be true, is no small joy and comfort to us, as we are sure it is to you and to her grace also, to whom you shall make again our hearty commendations, with no less gratulation of such good success. Thus we bid you heartily farewell from Sion, the 1st of September, 1548. Your loving brother, E. Somerset. From this letter it is evident that Lord Thomas had been casting horoscopes, and consulting fortune-tellers, who had promised him long life and a great sort of sons. It is difficult to imagine that the admiral, however faulty his morale might be on some points, could cherish evil intentions against her who had just caused his heart to overflow for the first time with the ineffable raptures of paternity. The charge of his having caused the death of Queen Catharine by poison can only be regarded as the fabrication of his enemies. Neither is there the slightest reason to believe that the unfavourable symptoms, which appeared on the third day after her delivery, were either caused or aggravated by his unkindness. On the contrary, his manner towards her, when she was evidently suffering under the grievous irritability of mind and body, incidental to puerperal fever, appears from the deposition of Lady Tyrwhitt, one of the most faithful and attached of her ladies, to have been soothing and affectionate. Let the reader judge from the subjoined record of that sad scene in the chamber of the departing queen. 2 days before the death of the queen, says Lady Tyrwhitt, at my coming to her in the morning, she asked me, where I had been so long? And said unto me, that she did fear such things in herself, that she was sure she could not live. I answered, as I thought, that I saw no likelihood of death in her. She then, having my lord admiral by the hand, and divers others standing by, spake these words partly, as I took, idly, or meaning in delirium. My Lady Tyrwhitt, I am not well handled, for those that be about me care not for me, but stand laughing at my grief, and the more good I willed to them, the less good they willed to me. Whereunto my lord admiral answered, Why, sweetheart, I would you no hurt. And she said to him again aloud, No, my lord, I think so. And immediately she said to him in his ear, But, my lord, you have given me many shrewd taunts. These words I perceived she spake with good memory, and very sharply and earnestly, for her mind was sore disquieted. My lord admiral, perceiving that I heard it, called me aside and asked me what she said, and I declared it plainly to him. Then he consulted with me that he would lie down on the bed by her, to look if he could pacify her unquietness with gentle communication, whereunto I agreed. And by the time he had spoken 3 or 4 words to her, she answered him roundly and sharply, saying, My lord, I would have given 1,000 marks to have had my full talk with Hewick, Dr. Hewick, the first day I was delivered, but I durst not for displeasing you. And I, hearing that, perceived her trouble to be so great, that my heart would serve me to hear no more. Such like communications she had with him the space of an hour, which they did hear that sat by her bedside. It is probable that the alarming charge in Catharine's life had been caused, not by any sinister practices against her life, but by whispers previously circulated among the gossips in her lying-in chamber, relating to her husband's passion for her royal stepdaughter, and his intention of aspiring to the hand of the princess, in case of her own decease. Her malady was puerperal fever. A sense of intolerable wrong was constantly expressed by her, yet she never explained the cause of her displeasure. She alluded to her delivery, but strange to say, never mentioned her infant. Wild and gloomy fantasies had superseded the first sweet gushings of maternal love in her troubled bosom, and she appeared unconscious of the existence of the babe she had so fondly anticipated. This symptom, with ladies in her situation, is generally the forerunner of death. On the very day when the scene occurred, described by Lady Tyrwhitt, Catharine Parr dictated her will, which is still extant in the Prerogative Office. It is dated September 5th, 1548, and it is to the following effect. That she, then lying on her deathbed, sick of body but of good mind, and perfect memory and discretion, being persuaded, and perceiving the extremity of death to approach her, gives all to her married espouse and husband, wishing them to be 1,000 times more in value than they were or been. There are no legacies, and the witnesses are 2 well-known historical characters, Robert Hewick, M.D., and John Parkhurst. This is a nuncupative or verbal will. It was not signed by the dying queen, which we find was usually the case with deathbed royal wills at that era. The witnesses were persons of high character, and even sacred authority in a sick chamber, being the physician and the chaplain. The latter became subsequently a bishop of the Reformed Church, highly distinguished for his Christian virtues. In after life, Parkhurst always mentioned Catharine Parr with great regard as his most gentle mistress. Was it likely that such a man would perjure himself for the sake of enriching Seymour? Yet the affectionate language of the will is inconsistent with the suspicions and reproaches which Lady Tyrwhitt affirmed that the dying queen threw out against her lord on the very day of its date, namely September 5th, 1548. Both these facts are depositions on oath made by two most respectable witnesses on the same day. A partisan might charge either Lady Tyrwhitt or Bishop Parkhurst with direct perjury, and say that Catharine Parr could not have spoken according to both depositions. But the physiologist comes to the aid of the historian, and, from Lady Tyrwhitt's hint of delirium, will truly allow that a wandering brain could utter such and many other inconsistencies. As Lady Tyrwhitt affirms that she entered the queen's apartment in the morning, when the lord admiral was by the bedside, with the patient's hand in his, it is likely that she came in just after the will had been made. Let us consider the state of Catharine Parr's mind at this juncture. Dr. Hewick had recently revealed to her danger. Her words, being persuaded of the approach of death, in her will, distinctly intimate this fact. The result was an instant testamentary deposition of her property, in which she at the same time exerted her peculiar privilege, as queen dowager, of bequeathing her personal effects, though a married woman, and showed her passionate love to her husband, for she left him all, wishing them, her goods, 1,000 times more than they have or been. Her words are evidently written as uttered, with all imperfections. He was the sole object of her thoughts. Her new-born infant was forgotten, a lapse of memory on the part of its mother, which doomed it to beggary before it could speak. All these circumstances certainly occurred in a short space of time, and doubtless occasioned great hurry of spirits. The queen's ladies knew not of her danger. Lady Tyrwhitt says she did not. The queen in her will says she herself had been persuaded of it. Then came the revulsion of feeling. The queen, on recollection, was not reconciled to death, and began to question angrily whether she had a right to die, whether her death was not caused by carelessness or malice. Lady Tyrwhitt saw she spoke deliriously. Her mind wandered, and former jealousies and affronts, hitherto successfully concealed, biassed her speech. She thought that her husband, to whom she had bequeathed her all, was exulting in her removal. She fancied, and that part of the narrative plainly reveals delirium, for such fancies are symptomatic, that he, she loved so well, stood deriding her misery. He acted considerately, soothing her as a nurse soothes a sick wayward child, but his manner, as described by Lady Tyrwhitt, was that of a person in possession of intellect, humouring the sad vagaries of a mind diseased. Catharine Parr expired on the 2nd day after the date of her will, being the 7th after the birth of her child. She was only in the 36th year of her age, having survived her royal husband, Henry VIII, by 1 year, 6 months, and 8 days. Her character is thus recorded by a contemporary quoted by Strype. She was endued with a pregnant wittiness joined with right wonderful grace of elegance, studiously diligent in acquiring knowledge, as well of human discipline as also of the Holy Scriptures, of incomparable chastity, which she kept not only from all spot, but from all suspicion, by avoiding all occasions of idleness, and condemning vain pastimes. Further also, in his church history, panegyrizes this queen in the highest terms of commendation. The official announcement of Queen Catharine Parr's death, together with the programme of her funeral, is copied from a curious contemporary manuscript in the College of Arms. Lady Jane Grey, who was with Queen Catharine at Sudley Castle at the time of her death, officiated at her funeral solemnity as chief mourner, which is certified in this document. A breviate of the interment of the Lady Catharine Parr, Queen Dowager, late wife to King Henry VIII, and after wife to Sir Thomas, Lord Seymour of Sudley, and High Admiral of England. Item, on Wednesday, the 5th of September, between 2 and 3 of the o'clock in the morning, died the aforesaid lady, late Queen Dowager, at the Castle of Sudley, in Gloucestershire, 1548, and lieth buried in the chapel of the said castle. Item, she was serred and chested in lead accordingly, and so remained in her privy chamber until things were in readiness. The chapel was hung with black cloth, garnished with scutcheons of marriages, namely king Henry VIII and her in pale under the crown, her own in lozenge under the crown. Also the arms of the lord admiral, and hers in pale without the crown. The rails were covered with black cloth for the mourners to sit within, with stools and cushions accordingly, and 2 lighted scutcheons stood upon the corpse during the service. The order in proceeding to the chapel. First, 2 conductors in black, with black staves, then gentlemen and esquires, then knights, then officers of the household, with their white staves, then the gentlemen ushers, then Somerset herald, in the tabard coat, then the corpse borne by 6 gentlemen in black gowns, with their hoods on their heads, then 11 staff torches, borne on each side by yeomen round about the corpse, and at each corner a knight for assistance, 4, with their hoods on their heads, and then Lady Jane, daughter to the Lord Marquess Dorset, chief mourner, her train borne up by a young lady, then 6 other lady mourners, 2 and 2, then yeomen 3 and 3, in rank, then all other follow. The manner of the service in the church. Item, when the corpse was set within the rails, and the mourners placed, the whole choir began, and sung certain psalms in English, and read 3 lessons, and after the 3rd lesson, the mourners, according to their degrees, and that which is accustomed, offered into the alms box, and when they had done, all other, as gentlemen or gentlewomen, that would. The offering done, Dr. Coverdale, the queen's almoner, began his sermon, which was very good and godly, and in one place thereof he took occasion to declare unto the people how they should none there think, say, or spread abroad that the offering which was there done was done anything to benefit the dead, but for the poor only, and also the lights, which were carried and stood about the corpse, were for the honor of the person, and for none other intent nor purpose. And so went through with his sermon, and made a godly prayer, and the whole church answered, and prayed the same with him in the end. The sermon done, the corpse was buried, during which time the choir sung Te Deum in English. And this done, the mourners dined, and the rest returned homeward again. All which aforesaid was done in the morning. This curious document presents the reader with the form of the first royal funeral solemnized according to Protestant rites. Queen Catharine's epitaph was written in Latin by her chamberlain Dr. Parkhurst, afterwards Bishop of Norwich. The translation by an anonymous author is elegant. In this new tomb the royal Catharine lies, flower of her sex, renowned, great, and wise, a wife, by every nuptial virtue known, a faithful partner once of Henry's throne. To Seymour next her plighted her hand she yields, Seymour, whose Neptune's trident justly wields. From him a beauteous daughter blessed her arms, an infant copy of her parents' charms. When now 7 days this infant flower had bloomed, heaven in its wrath the mother's soul resumed. The erudite writer, who has collected many interesting particulars in the Archaeologica of the life of this queen, says, she was tormented and broken-hearted with the pride of her sister-in-law and the ill temper of her husband, whom she adored to the last. No instance of personal incivility or harshness on the part of the Lord Admiral towards Catharine Parr has, however, been recorded, without, indeed, the shrewd taunts she mentioned in her delirium were matters of fact. If so, like many other ill-tempered husbands, he was resolved no one should revile his wife but himself, for he was wont to affirm, with his usual terrible oath, that no one should speak ill of the queen, or if he knew it, he would take his fist to the ears of those who did, from the lowest to the highest. The charge of his having hastened her death is not only without the slightest proof, but really opposed to the general evidences of history. The fatal termination of the queen's illness was not anticipated even by her husband, and how great a shock it was to him may be gathered from the fact that in his first perplexity all his political plans were disarranged, and he wrote to the Marquess of Dorset to send for Lady Jane Grey, as he meant to dismiss his household, but before a month was over he wrote again to the Marquess, saying, By my last letters, written at a time when with the queen's highness's death I was so amazed that I had small regard either to myself or my doings, and partly then thinking that my great loss must presently have constrained me to have dissolved my whole house, I offer to send my lady Jane unto you whensoever ye send for her. But having more deeply considered the matter, he found he could continue his establishment, where shall remain, he adds, not only the gentlewomen of the queen's highness's privy chamber, but also the maids which wait at large, and other women who were about her in her lifetime, with 120 gentlemen and yeomen. The ambition of Lord Admiral Seymour still projected placing a royal partner at the head of his establishment. At present, he invited his aged mother, Lady Seymour, to superintend this vast household, and he concluded his letter to Dorset with the assurance that if he would restore Lady Jane Grey as his inmate, Lady Seymour should treat her as if she were her daughter. After this letter, Seymour came to Bradgate, and, says Lord Dorset, he was so earnestly in hand with me and my wife that he would have no nay, so that we were contented for her to return to his house. At the same time and place, he renewed the favourite project of the deceased queen and himself, that Edward VI should marry Lady Jane Grey, adding, that if he could get the king at liberty, this marriage should take place. Thus the fair girl was restored to the guardianship of Lord Admiral Seymour, and actually remained under his roof till his arrest and imprisonment in the Tower. End of Section 7.